Good evening. Welcome to Defacto Review, our weekly in-depth analysis on the current news and affairs with our commentator and economist, Mr. Jargal Defacto.
Good evening.
And I'm your host, Namsredzint. You can join in on our conversation on MNB World Facebook page and on Twitter with hashtag Jargal_Defacto. Now on to our first topic for the day. Zimbabwe have been grey listed and Ethiopia, Sri Lanka and Tunisia have been removed from the grey list. Mongolian clientelism and conflict among the political parties. The development and independence of NGOs are vital for civil society and for democracy. Now let's get into our first topic. The annual meeting of the Financial Action Task Force, an independent intergovernmental organization against money laundering and terrorism financing, was held in Paris from 13th to 18th of October. During this meeting, they have announced that Mongolia has officially been grey-listed. Mongolia was grey-listed in 2013 before, and this is the second time the country has been included in the grey list. Now, our question about this one is, what is Financial Action Task Force and why does they grey-list countries?
Well, this organization was created in 1989 at the G7 summit to fight against corruption, money laundering, and financing terrorism. And they have created the organization called the Financial Action Task Force. And they recognize the threat to the banking system and the financial institutions, and the European Union joined them, and 8 countries were there, 8 jurisdictions, and nowadays there are 39 members countries in this organization. Mongolia is not member of AFATF itself, but Mongolia is a member of its original structure called Asia Pacific Group. Mongolia became member in 2004. Since that, Mongolia is trying to implement the 40 recommendations that this organization have introduced to its members, and which mostly includes a very comprehensive plan of action needed to fight against money laundering. Mongolia, while being member of the Asian Pacific Group, Mongolia had a report. They have a mutual monitoring report, each country by other countries, called peer countries. And we had a substantial, very comprehensive report in September 2017 called Anti-Money Laundering and Counter-Terrorist Financing Measures, Mongolia Mutual Evaluation Report, which is available on the website of that Asian Pacific Group, which unfortunately was not very much broadly available in Mongolian in our society for the last 2 years. It's bad because the society could do a lot if they knew it before.
So Mongolia was grey-listed in 2013 before. What happened and why were we grey-listed again?
Well, in this report, Mongolia is exposed to a range of money laundering threats and vulnerabilities, higher risk predicate offenses, fraud, environmental crimes, tax evasion, and corruption. Moderate risk threats include drug offenses, smuggling, organized crime, crime against the banking regulations, theft and burglary, and risk from foreign proceeds. That's what the report says. Indeed, it says, the proceeds generated from these predicate crimes are laundering in Mongolia and abroad. Within Mongolia, proceeds are mainly used to purchase real estate, vehicles, machinery, and other consumer items, and also laundering using legal persons, including in the construction industry. In relation to corruption, bank accounts of family members are mainly used for the receipt of monies, which are then transferred to foreign bank accounts and offshore accounts, financial institutions. In some cases, these funds have been returned to Mongolia using the banking system. And Mongolia, cooperation in coordination on proliferation of financing in Mongolia is absent. That's the reasons why Mongolia is grey listed. And it was reported in September 2 years ago from now, but there were out of 40 recommendations, half was done, but the current government have done substantial works, and 15 of them is implemented. Now 5 out of 40 recommendations are missing in Mongolia, and 4, there is also outcome report. And there are 11 items to check, and Mongolia is missing 4. So that's why Mongolia is listed.
So what happens to the countries that have been grey listed, internally and both externally? You mentioned before that first of all, dollar prices will increase.
Certainly. Well, we should know 2 things. There is a blacklist and grey list. Blacklist country, Iran and North Korea. And all transactions with these 2 countries, with any institutions, are forbidden or sanctioned in the world. With the grey listed countries, they don't give particular recommendations to partners, possible whoever is having relations with these grey listed countries, but they ask them to have into consideration when they have a risk assessment about this country. That is already a signal for, in particular, AAA companies, banks, who are very careful about this kind of transactions, operations. It may take longer time for transferring money to and from Mongolia, because it will take longer time to check about this legality of those money. And they are, out of this 4 outcome reporting provisions, we have 3 is not done so far. It was 4 1 month ago. The missing one, the Mongolians have done during one thing. It is we had some 250 or so Korean workers, North Korean workers, that were left the country. So we now 3 missings. That is, first, we're not controlling enough all banking institutions. First, secondly, we are not acting upon on the doubtful transactions. For example, Mongolia is not controlling properly the gold production, smuggling. Clear example is if there is a royalty 2.5%, 20 tons at least gold comes to Mongolia. If it is becoming 5%, like it happened this year, then the 20 tons are disappearing through the border. And recently they found out a few kilos of gold smuggling here and there. But you can imagine how much tons go through the border smuggling. The 4th is nobody is punished in this country. Nobody got the related corresponding punishment for corruptions and other crimes, and which is clearly shown in case of arrests of several high-ranking officials, and nothing had happened. They have released, and there was also arrest of several heads of the state-owned companies, commercial banks, but all are released, and no explanation is coming. So Mongolian judicial system is not able to proceed through court all these crimes.
So what must we do to be removed from the grey list? And how long will it take?
Well, what are the reasons? That depends on the reasons. As just now I explained, these 3 reasons, these obstacles to be removed, solved, but I don't think it is just a case of a few criminals to be sued and the court makes penalty, etc. But it's systematic in this country. The above mentioned these corruption cases, money laundering is so deep, and most unfortunately that they relate to structures, state structures, agencies, including the anti-corruption agency, general intelligence agency, police, judicial system. They do not cooperate in coordinated matter. That's what is keep staying, and until. I mean, this kind of things is something that it depends on Mongolians, commodity prices don't depend on us, but this one is depending on us. I think if we have a strong political will, power, coordination, then that next meeting will take in probably February of this organization, because this one is convening 3 times a year. So by at least some of them can be done by February next year.
Okay, so let's get into our second topic. The author of From Totalitarianism to Defective Democracy and political analyst Michal Klima have visited Mongolia last week and organized a lecture. Mr. Jargal Defacto have conducted an interview with him. So our first question about this is that Michal Klima mentioned in his book, From Totalitarianism to Defective Democracy, that political parties of post-communist countries are taken over by the people who serve their financiers instead of their citizens, which cause clientelism system to rule over the country. Do you agree with this? And does Mongolia have this clientelism system?
Indeed, I do. In fact, when his first book, this book came 3-4 years ago, I found English version, English or short transcripts. So I wrote a couple articles about that, how much correlated that with Mongolia. Very similar case in all post-communist countries, where privatization of the formerly state-owned enterprises assets happened. And in Czech Republic, of course, also the former communists, those who were close to information, who were close to the decision making, namely power structures, security structure, law enforcement structure, judicial system. Those people who were working there have most benefited in Czech Republic, which was later seen, and because the Czech Republic has more tradition of civic society than in Mongolia, they have been able to decrease this people, clientelists' impact on the society by today. But what has actually happened is, since the people got a lot of money, they were controlling the political system, and the political parties, which are supposed to be bridge between society and the government, is serving them as a bridge, because they were financed by those people who made this money. They are started to serving their clients. Fukuyama said there are 2 kinds of corruptions. One is rent seeking, people who wants to get very rich, not very fast. Those who is making clientelist approach. So that's what had happened in the Czech Republic, in all former socialist countries. But this time, after 3-4 years, he came to Mongolia by invitation of Mongolian National University. I get an interview, soon it will be displayed on screen for you after translation. He said that today that structure is becoming stronger and more active outside of Czech Republic, working with non-transparent regimes like China and Russia. That's what he said. So these clientelists found their way in their own way.
So what is the cause of clientelism in Mongolia? Did the same thing happen?
Yes, almost.
Exactly the same?
And in a different scale. Of course, it's 2 different countries, smaller, bigger, different, of course. Mongolian economy is smaller, but we had also property to privatize. The same had to happen. People close to information all got most benefited. Somehow they got now majority shares of those privatized companies, shops, everything. But in Mongolia, because because it was smaller players, relatively got more disseminated than the less skewed than in the Czech Republic. But however, in Mongolia, that clientelism is taking power all the time, and because political party financing is key, and kept in secret, and even political parties, the ruling party was selling state positions at certain level of money, and they estimated 60 billion tugriks they're supposed to have it, which probably they have it already because they took power. And the other thing is, which makes that bridge or that this clientelists is a ever increasing, becoming controlless state-owned enterprises. And we have more and more of them. Many of them are in loss, support from the budget. The money was supposed to go for social needs, but they were supporting the state-owned enterprises. And unfortunately, these state-owned enterprises are de facto, that's the de jure, it's the name, but de facto they are party-owned enterprises. So the whole fight in this country is in between the political powers, clientelists who want to have a control on the state-owned enterprises. So the similar. And another thing, unlike Czech Republic, we talk, but no result. Recently, ex-Prime Minister Altun Hoyag talked about ex-President Elbegdorj, who, he said, benefiting from Erdinet Corporation, receiving billions of Tugriks, playing casino, etc. He made the several reports. Then we have a silence of related organizations, anti-corruption agency, judicial judges, general intelligence agency, police. They have all silence. What does it mean? I mean, I'm not me speaking as ordinary citizen, but the ex-prime minister speaking like this. So the more they have a silence, they are dividing the society. They're downsizing the confidence of people in the state. So that we ask them to take a relevant measure with him. If he is lying, he should have responsibility. If he's not lying, that the other guy should have a responsibility. So this kind of things are really making this no capacity of Mongolian institutions to take proper actions against corruption. And that is feeding money laundering.
So did Czech Republic itself, did they take care of it? Like, as Michal Klema said, it has been going on for 25 years.
You see, for corruption-driven society, only when it's democratic political structure, only way is the growth of civic society, the maturity of civic society. Otherwise, the state cannot control it themselves. So that action is more active in Czech Republic, and they did more success. That's why they are shrinking this clientelist approach in their political structure, though they are still existing, according to Michal Klima, who made another book, by the way, extending the previous book with another 3 chapters, and I hope it will be translated into Mongolian like the one before.
So can Mongolia take this example and implement it on our country and maybe reduce this?
It is not an issue of can or not. It is an issue must, because only civic society in democracy can demand transparency of the ruling parties, governments, everybody who are elected. And thanks God, this country can change every 4 years political powers. But that is being also becoming hard, because still they try to buy votes under many measures. Some parties are now already promising free apartments to everybody, etc. So all these things are actually forbidden by law, but it's happening today in this country. In different ways they promise, because election year is coming next year. So in that circumstances, we need to learn how civic societies were working in Czech Republic, in those countries. And by the way, our third topic is about that.
Okay, so let's get into our third topic now. Defacto Institute have conducted comparative analysis of institutional environments of non-governmental organizations in Mongolia, Hungary, and Poland, and presented the results this week. This research paper posits that foreign funding is inevitable part of fostering civil society and operations of NGOs in young democratic countries. Thus, restricting financial sources of NGO is no different than trying to put a stop to its operations. So our first question about this one is, could you tell us about the analysis first? Why did you compare Mongolia with Poland and Hungary?
Very simple, because Mongolia is going to do almost the same things like Hungary and Poland. Why? We have law about non-governmental organizations since 1997. After 22 years, the Ministry of Justice and Internal Affairs suggesting new draft of law, which is called Non-Profit Organizations Law, under which they want to have more control over financing of NGOs. And they find that we have a lot, several dozens of NGOs, because registration information and the tax information are changing completely different. So it's hard to say how many, 15, 16,000 or 5, 6,000. It's different matter really actually how many NGOs we have. But NGO is already part and parcel of our life. But nowadays, because according to the ministry, that we have a lot of religious organizations, for example, of different religion, who under the name of NGOs bring in more money and not accountable, etc. So, but this religious issue can be regulated by the law on the religion or something, not through the NGO. But under the changing NGO, they do exactly what Poland and Hungary did in their own time. We had interesting conversation this week where we had 2 parliament members, Björn Potsakt and Jargal, were there, and several NGOs. And after long preparations, we had a whole half day of meeting about the draft law, and basically agreed that before adopting the law, we should approve the policy concept on NGO, civic society, which probably a right way. Then it will be easier to go with the amendments of the law. That's what we have agreed so far. And at this meeting, Defacto, our institute, Defacto Institute, introduced our comparative analysis of these 3 countries. So,
what's wrong with, getting finance from foreign countries, especially for non-governmental organizations?
You see, there is an organization called Civicus, which makes a report on civic society by country. In the report from 2018, Mongolia is classified as a limited freedom NGO countries. Why? Because it turned out the citizens' activity are weak and very limited impact on the way policy is made in the country. In the plus, for the last 22 years, financing of NGOs mostly done by foreign donor countries, including like Asia foundations, Canada foundations, or ADB, World Bank, who were supporting the NGOs on democracy, freedom of speech, and more power, more participation of the citizens. And what our government is suggesting is they will have civic, it will call Civic Society Support Council. The organization that will consist of 9 persons, 5 of them are nominated by the ministries from the state, but 4 of them will be nominated from or selected from the NGOs. And they say that they will finance now, and after they will control the foreign financing of these organizations, which in fact will have a certainly very negative impact on the democracy like Mongolia. You see, in these 2 related countries, the same happened.
So, if they can't get funding from foreign countries, foreign organizations, will the government fund them? Who will fund them? And if the government funds them, can they be really independent from the government?
2 things. They will create new agency, which will be running that support council. And government is supposedly to finance by selecting NGOs. That will create quite big dependence, because NGOs will try, to have finance to do what the government wants to do. So that's the one concern. Secondly, it will create another corruption. Everything that government distribute is money from taxes, and they are distributing it. Whatever procedure is there, it's very hard to avoid influence on that decision making. Exactly the same happened in Hungary, for example. In 2017, they made also a fund called. The 2017 they made a law first. It's called transparency. The law on transparency that is supported by foreign entities. Okay, and you, according to the Hungarian law, if you receive more than $23,000 financing from foreign companies, you need to completely be accountable, report, etc., because it is a risk for money laundering and terrorism financing, under which all this law activity of NGOs quite came down in Hungary. The same happened with Poland, where they have also exactly the same name center like what we are trying to do. They have the same agency at the parliament, and if you have a certain amount of money from foreign countries, you need to report. So, why Mongolian civil societies are against that kind of financing limiting? Because here in Mongolia, in particular, in post-communist countries in general, Mongolia has no culture of financing NGOs, civic organizations, and it's very hard to have money from companies, and plus the companies, like in other countries, they are not tax exempted for their right job for the society, understanding the activity, presence of the civic society, which is not happening in Mongolia. So that means civic society, NGOs in this country will actually quite much shrink. That's why people are very worried about that new law.
So if this new law is adopted, does that mean that no NGO will get funding from foreign organizations, or would they be limited?
They will. That's the question we need to discuss. But under the name of that creating this new government agency through which the finance is supposed to come, usually limit completely the foreign financing, which will be very bad consequences for current NGOs in the country, which are mostly financed by those institutions, because Mongolian companies are not sponsoring them at large.
Okay, so unfortunately that is all the time we had for today. Thank you for staying with us. We will see you next week with more topics. Have a nice evening. Goodbye.
Thank you.